In the ongoing Israeli war on the Gaza Strip, the Israeli Defense Force, or IDF, has deliberately targeted mosques, claiming that Hamas was storing weapons inside the mosques. This claim has been widely parroted by the Western media, oftentimes reported as fact, even though the only source for this claim is the IDF itself. The IDF released a video of the bombing of one mosque as evidence of what it claimed was a secondary explosion that resulted from the destruction of a weapons cache inside the mosque. But a closer look at the video clearly reveals that the second explosion was the result of a second Israeli bomb. Slowing down the footage, you can clearly see the first bomb hitting the mosque. The bomb itself is clearly visible, captured in one of the frames. You can see the point of impact on the roof of the building just before the first explosion. The second bomb, or missile, isn't as clearly visible in any of the frames. It appears only as a blur, but its line of travel is visible when watching the frames in slow motion. Also, just before the second explosion, you see a depression suddenly formed in the smoke caused by the first explosion, evidence that a second missile has just penetrated the cloud, with the vacuum created by the displaced air of the high-speed projectile sucking the smoke back downward, creating this hole. The second explosion then occurs, clearly originating from the same point where a falling projectile has just pierced through the smoke. One would also expect, if this were the result of weapons being stored in the mosque having been detonated by the initial explosion, that there would be a whole series of secondary smaller explosions, rather than only one large explosion, much resembling the first. The IDF has claimed this footage shows evidence of the use of a mosque, a civilian building with protected status under the Geneva Conventions, being used by Hamas to store weapons, contrary to the laws of war. Contrary to the IDF's purpose in releasing this footage, however, the evidence it shows is that Israel, not Hamas, was responsible for committing a war crime. The IDF has engaged in a pattern of making false claims in its propaganda defending Israel's actions against Gaza. In another notable example, the IDF shelled a UN school being used as a shelter, killing more than 40 civilians. The IDF claimed that Hamas had fired mortars from the school in an attempt to justify the deliberate targeting of the UN site.
Unfortunately, after the event, it turned out that the mortar fire from Hamas was coming from within a UN school. The Hamas had cynically used the school, where a number of civilians were taking refuge, as a location to fire on the IDF.
But the UN denied that Hamas had fired mortars from the school. The Director of Operations for the UN Relief and Works Agency in Gaza, John Ging, said the location of all UN sites had been given to Israel, and that Hamas had not violated the sanctity of the school. The IDF was later forced to admit that no fire had come from the school. That was the third UN-run school to be hit, in addition to a UN medical center. Israeli forces also fired on UN convoys bringing humanitarian supplies into the Gaza Strip. And on January 15th, Israel fired upon a UN warehouse storing humanitarian goods with white phosphorus shells, setting it on fire and destroying supplies much of the Palestinian residents of Gaza had come to depend upon for survival. These actions constitute serious war crimes, for which Israeli leaders are accountable under international law.